There are social rituals designed to reveal character through the management of minor discomforts, and few are more reliably diagnostic than the moment when a restaurant bill arrives at a table shared by people whose relationships exist in some ambiguous state between genuine friendship and mere social acquaintance. The bill becomes a test, not of generosity or fairness exactly, but of something more subtle, the willingness to navigate awkwardness, to express needs that might create tension, to value honesty over the preservation of comfortable fiction. Ethan Clarke hated these moments with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to their actual stakes. Not just restaurant bills, though those were particularly fraught, but any situation that concluded without clean resolution, meetings that ended with vague action items nobody would actually execute, conversations that trailed off mid-thought leaving important things unsaid, social interactions that concluded with promises everyone knew wouldn't be kept. These incomplete endings created a particular kind of anxiety in Ethan, a sense that something important had been left unfinished, that the failure to properly conclude was itself a conclusion carrying more meaning than whatever explicit agreement had been reached. He was 34 years old and had been managing this anxiety for as long as he could remember, trying to impose clarity on social situations that naturally resisted it, attempting to create definitive conclusions in contexts where ambiguity was often the most honest possible outcome. His professional life accommodated this tendency. He worked as a project manager for a software development firm, a role that explicitly required breaking complex initiatives into discrete tasks with clear completion criteria. At work, he could demand specificity, could insist on concrete commitments, could treat relationships as fundamentally transactional arrangements where responsibilities were defined and outcomes were measurable. But personal relationships didn't work that way, and Ethan's inability to fully accept this fact created chronic low-grade discomfort that he'd learned to manage through careful social choreography. He maintained friendships through regular but not too frequent contact, kept conversations on topics that felt substantive without becoming truly vulnerable, participated in group activities that had clear start and end times and defined purposes. This approach worked adequately most of the time, creating the appearance of social connection without requiring the kind of messy emotional honesty that made Ethan uncomfortable. On a Thursday evening in late November, Ethan found himself sitting at a round table in Meridian Bistro, a restaurant he'd selected specifically for its location, downtown, accessible to everyone, its atmosphere, casual enough not to feel like a big deal but nice enough to suggest he'd put thought into the choice, and its prices, moderate, unlikely to create financial anxiety for anyone in the group. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse, exposed brick walls and Edison bulb lighting creating the kind of studied casualness that characterized many establishments in this neighborhood. Across the table sat three people Ethan had once called friends, college friends from an institution they'd all graduated from 12 years earlier, relationships that had been forged through proximity and shared experience during those formative years when friendship required little maintenance beyond simply existing in the same spaces at the same times. They'd been close once, in the way college students are close, late-night conversations about philosophy and future plans, collaborative academic projects, parties and study sessions and the kind of casual intimacy that comes from sharing a life stage when everyone is equally uncertain about who they're becoming. Maya Patel sat to Ethan's right, 33 years old and embodying a particular kind of polished urban professionalism, tailored blazer over silk blouse, hair styled with the kind of casual precision that required significant time to achieve, makeup applied with skill that made it nearly invisible. She worked in corporate finance, had climbed steadily since graduation, spoke frequently about promotions and career trajectory and the strategic decisions she was making to position herself for partnership. Her success was real and impressive, but Ethan had noticed over their post-college years how her conversation had become increasingly dominated by professional achievements, as if work had gradually colonized all other aspects of her identity. Leo Martinez sat across from Ethan, also 33, dressed in the deliberately casual way of someone in tech who wanted to signal that he didn't care about appearance while actually caring quite a bit. Expensive jeans, plain t-shirt that probably cost more than it looked like it should, sneakers that were limited edition releases. He worked as a user experience designer for a startup that had recently secured Series B funding, a job that seemed to involve a lot of meetings about meetings and strategic thinking about problems that didn't quite exist yet. Leo's defining characteristic had always been his sardonic wit, his ability to puncture pretension with perfectly timed observations, though Ethan had noticed that this quality had curdled slightly over the years into something more defensive, humor deployed as shield rather than as genuine engagement. Jonah Kim was the fourth member of their party, 34 like Ethan, sitting to Maya's right and spending most of the evening's first hour with his attention divided between the table and his phone. Jonah worked in non-profit sector, something related to educational access, Ethan thought, though he wasn't entirely sure because Jonah spoke about his work so infrequently that details remained vague. He'd always been the quietest of their group, content to observe while others talked, occasionally offering insights that were more perceptive than his limited verbal participation suggested. But his quietness had evolved from comfortable to isolating, his presence becoming more absence, his attention directed increasingly toward the screen in his hand rather than the people around him. This dinner had been Ethan's idea, conceived 6 weeks earlier during one of those moments of guilt about neglected relationships that periodically surfaced in his consciousness. He'd sent a group text proposing they reconnect, had received responses that were enthusiastic enough to suggest genuine interest while remaining vague enough to avoid actual commitment. After several rounds of scheduling negotiations conducted entirely through text, they'd finally landed on this Thursday evening, all of them able to make it work, though all of them also conveying through subtle linguistic cues that this required some logistical complexity on their parts. The evening had started adequately. They'd arrived within 10 minutes of each other, had exchanged greetings that felt warm if slightly performative, had settled into their seats with the kind of nervous energy that comes from reuniting with people you used to know well but no longer quite do. The conversation had flowed through predictable channels, work updates, housing situations, observations about how the city had changed, questions about mutual acquaintances from college whose current circumstances none of them knew with any certainty. They'd ordered drinks, Maya and Leo got wine, Jonah ordered a craft beer that the server had to explain, Ethan stuck with water because he was driving and because alcohol sometimes lowered his defenses in ways that made him uncomfortable. Food orders followed. Maya got the salmon, expensive but not the most expensive item on the menu. Leo ordered a burger with various upcharges, premium toppings, truffle fries, that pushed his individual total notably higher. Jonah got pasta, mid-range. Ethan ordered a chicken dish that was among the cheaper entrees, consciously staying toward the lower end of the price spectrum partly from genuine preference and partly from an instinctive financial conservatism that made him uncomfortable spending freely even when he could afford it. The food arrived, was consumed with appropriate appreciative comments, accompanied by conversation that touched on old memories. Remember that professor who, remember that party when, remember how we used to, stories they'd told before, narratives that had calcified into their canonical versions through repeated telling. The laughter felt familiar but not quite genuine, like wearing clothes that technically fit but that you'd outgrown in some way that wasn't about size. They were performing friendship, Ethan realized partway through the meal. Going through motions that signaled connection without requiring actual vulnerability, maintaining the fiction that their relationships had survived 12 years of geographical separation and life divergence, pretending that shared history was sufficient to sustain present intimacy. Nobody was saying anything true. Nobody was expressing any needs or disappointments or genuine feelings beyond the acceptable range of pleasant surface-level sharing. And then the server arrived with the bill. The moment. He was young, maybe 22, performing his role with practiced efficiency. Whenever you're ready, no rush, delivered in a tone that suggested he meant it while his body language suggested he'd appreciate if they didn't linger too much longer. He placed the black leather folder containing the bill at the exact center of the table, geometrically equidistant from all four diners, a positioning that felt deliberately neutral, refusing to assign responsibility to any particular person. Then he walked away, leaving them with the check and each other. The silence that followed was not dramatic. Nobody gasped or tensed visibly. The conversation didn't stop abruptly, it just sort of faded, trailing off as awareness of the bill's presence spread through the group like a subtle contagion. Maya finished her sentence about a work project, Leo made a brief acknowledging noise, and then quiet settled over the table. Ethan stared at the black folder without reaching for it. He was acutely aware of the social dynamics in play. Whoever looked at the bill first was implicitly volunteering to deal with it, to coordinate payment, to potentially be the person who suggested how to split it. But he was also aware that everyone else was similarly conscious of this fact, that they were all engaged in the same strategic avoidance, the same pretense of not noticing what was clearly demanding attention. The silence extended. 3 seconds. 5. 7. Long enough to become unmistakably awkward, long enough that acknowledging it had become harder than just letting it continue. Maya broke first. She leaned back slightly, adopting a posture of casual engagement rather than active problem-solving. "So, how do we want to do this?" The question was phrased to suggest she had no particular preference, that she was simply facilitating a conversation about logistics rather than making any kind of statement about fairness or financial arrangements. But the phrasing itself, "How do we want to do this?" put the question back to the group rather than offering a solution. Leo laughed, the sound carrying his characteristic edge of irony. "Split evenly?" He said it as a question, but with enough lightness to suggest he wasn't deeply invested in the answer, that he was floating the idea as a possibility rather than advocating for it. Ethan did rapid mental math. He'd ordered the cheapest entree, had drunk only water. Maya and Leo had each gotten wine. Leo's burger with upcharges had been noticeably more expensive than Ethan's chicken. Splitting evenly would mean Ethan subsidizing their more expensive choices, paying perhaps $10 more than his actual consumption warranted. $10. Not a significant amount objectively. He could afford it. The difference wouldn't materially impact his budget or his life. But it felt wrong in some way he couldn't quite articulate, not the money itself, but what it represented. The presumption that Ethan's financial boundaries didn't matter, that preventing social discomfort was worth more than fairness, that he should absorb the cost of others' choices without comment. He could speak up. Could say, "Actually, maybe we should just pay for what we ordered individually," in a tone that kept it light, transactional, not accusatory. The restaurant would easily accommodate separate checks. Nobody would be offended, or if they were offended they'd have no reasonable grounds for it. But speaking up meant creating discomfort. Meant marking himself as the person who cared about small amounts of money, who wasn't generous enough to just let it go, who valued $10 over social harmony. Meant risking being seen as cheap, as difficult, as someone who made things awkward instead of just going along. The silence had returned, everyone waiting for someone else to commit to a position. Jonah was still looking at his phone, apparently not tracking the conversation or choosing not to engage with it. Maya had her wallet out but wasn't making any moves toward the bill. Leo was studying his wine glass as if it contained something fascinating. "I'm fine with splitting," Ethan heard himself say, his voice coming out slightly higher than normal, slightly too casual, betraying the discomfort he was trying to conceal. "Whatever's easiest." The relief was visible on everyone's faces, the collective exhale at having avoided a difficult conversation. They pulled out credit cards. Maya grabbed the bill folder and did quick math on her phone's calculator, announced the per-person amount plus tip. Ethan handed over his card along with everyone else, the transaction handled with the kind of efficient impersonality that financial exchanges often employ to avoid emotional content. They talked while waiting for cards to be processed, but the conversation had changed quality, surface-level observations about how long it had been since they'd all gotten together, vague assertions that they should do it more often, no specific plans made or commitments requested. The moment with the bill had revealed something none of them wanted to acknowledge, that their friendship had become a performance, that none of them actually wanted to put in the work required to maintain genuine connection, that the evening had been more obligation than desire. Cards were returned, receipts signed. They gathered their belongings with the slightly too energetic movement of people eager to conclude something that had become uncomfortable. Outside the restaurant, in the parking lot illuminated by streetlights and the glow from surrounding buildings, they lingered briefly in that awkward space between ending the evening and actually departing. "We should definitely do this again," Maya said, the statement delivered with enough enthusiasm to sound sincere while remaining vague enough to avoid any actual commitment. "Yeah, for sure," Leo agreed. "Maybe not wait so long next time." Jonah nodded but didn't add anything verbal, was already walking toward his car with phone in hand, attention split between physical navigation and whatever screen was commanding his focus. Ethan contributed his own affirmation, "Definitely, let's make it happen," while knowing with certainty that it wouldn't happen, that none of them would follow up, that this evening had been not a reconnection but a confirmation of disconnection, a final check-in before accepting that their college friendships had run their course. They exchanged brief hugs, the physical contact feeling obligatory rather than warm, and dispersed to their separate vehicles, their separate lives, their separate trajectories that had been diverging for years and would continue diverging despite tonight's attempt to pretend otherwise. Ethan's apartment was a 20-minute drive from the restaurant, a journey that took him through downtown streets gradually transitioning to residential neighborhoods, the city's density slowly decreasing until he reached his building in an area that was neither particularly desirable nor particularly problematic, just affordable and adequate. He drove on autopilot, his conscious mind barely tracking the route while the rest of his attention replayed the evening. Not the entire evening, just the moment with the bill. The silence. Maya's question. Leo's suggestion. His own response, "I'm fine with splitting." He wasn't fine with splitting. He'd lied, a small social lie of the type everyone tells constantly to maintain smooth social functioning. But it bothered him in a way that felt disproportionate to the stakes. $10. He was upset about $10. No, that wasn't quite it. He was upset about the dishonesty, about his own inability to express a simple preference, about the social dynamics that made it easier to lie than to be truthful about something as mundane as restaurant payment. But it was more than that too. The moment had revealed how hollow their relationships had become, how much of the evening had been performance rather than genuine connection. They'd spent 2 hours together and said nothing true, nothing vulnerable, nothing that required actual trust or intimacy. They'd maintained pleasant surfaces while carefully avoiding any depth that might create discomfort or require emotional exposure. And the bill, that stupid, mundane restaurant bill, had somehow concentrated all of this into a single revealing moment. The silence around it had been the silence of people who didn't trust each other enough to be honest, who valued avoiding awkwardness over expressing actual needs, who'd chosen comfortable performance over uncomfortable authenticity. Ethan pulled into his building's parking garage, turned off the engine, sat in the quiet darkness for a moment. He felt a heaviness that had nothing to do with the meal he'd consumed, a kind of existential disappointment that he couldn't quite articulate. He'd organized this dinner hoping to reconnect with people who'd once been important to him. Instead, he'd confirmed that those connections no longer existed in any meaningful way, that they'd all become strangers who shared a past but not a present. He should feel sad about this, he thought. Should grieve the loss of friendships that had once mattered. But what he actually felt was relief, the kind that comes from stopping a pretense you didn't realize you'd been maintaining, from having permission to acknowledge that something is over rather than continuing to act like it still exists. His phone buzzed. A text message from Maya, "Thanks for organizing. Good to see everyone." The emoji bothered him more than it should have. It was trying too hard, attempting to inject warmth into a message that was fundamentally perfunctory. He typed back, "Yeah, good to catch up." Deleted the period at the end because it looked too formal, too final. Added it back because not having it felt too casual. Settled on, "Yeah, good to catch up," with an exclamation point that felt false but appropriate to the performance they were maintaining. No one else texted. The conversation was concluded, the obligation fulfilled. They'd done their duty to former friendship, had invested 2 hours in maintaining the fiction that their college relationships had survived into their 30s, and now they could return to their actual lives unburdened by guilt about neglected connections. Ethan didn't hear from any of them in the days immediately following the dinner. No follow-up texts, no casual check-ins, no photos shared or memes forwarded or any of the micro-communications that maintain modern friendships. The group chat where he'd initially proposed the dinner remained silent, its last message his own, "Thanks everyone for making time," sent the night of the dinner, responded to with thumbs-up reactions but no words. This silence felt different than the ordinary quiet of busy lives. It felt like conclusion, like a door being closed without ceremony, like mutual recognition that the evening had been an ending rather than a renewal. He found himself thinking about it at odd moments, not the entire experience, but specific details. The way Maya had leaned back when asking how to handle the bill, body language creating distance from the problem even while voicing it. The way Leo's laugh had contained that edge of irony, as if finding the whole situation slightly absurd while participating in it anyway. The way Jonah hadn't looked up from his phone, his disengagement so complete that he might as well have not been there at all. And his own response, "I'm fine with splitting." The ease with which the lie had emerged, the automaticity of choosing social comfort over personal honesty. He'd spent his entire adult life practicing this kind of diplomatic dishonesty, small accommodations to avoid friction, minor betrayals of his own preferences in service of smooth social functioning. When had that become his default mode? When had he stopped saying what he actually meant in favor of saying what would create the least awkwardness? 3 weeks after the dinner, Maya's social media showed photos from another group gathering, her with different friends, people Ethan didn't recognize, everyone laughing in that slightly performative way people laugh when they know they're being photographed. The caption mentioned, "catching up with the crew," and used hashtags about friendship and gratitude. Ethan felt nothing looking at it. No jealousy, no FOMO, just a kind of distant observation that Maya had other friendships, other crews, and he was not part of them despite their shared history. A month after the dinner, Leo posted job news. He'd taken a position at a larger company, a move he framed as exciting opportunity. Ethan liked the post, added a comment, "Congrats. That's awesome." Leo responded with a thanks, and that was the extent of their interaction. They'd been close once, had spent countless hours together in college, had shared confidences and vulnerabilities that seemed impossible to imagine now. But the person in those memories felt different from the person at the dinner, as if Leo had been gradually replaced by someone who looked similar but was fundamentally different. Jonah disappeared entirely from social media around the same time, his accounts going dark without explanation. Ethan wondered if this was intentional withdrawal or just Jonah's perpetual disengagement extending to its logical conclusion. They'd never been particularly close even in college. Jonah had been part of their group more through proximity than affinity, but his total absence still registered as a kind of loss, another connection severed without acknowledgement or ceremony. 2 months after the dinner, Ethan found himself at another dinner with different people. These were work colleagues, not friends exactly but friendly, people he saw daily and had developed comfort with through sustained professional contact. When the bill came, Sarah from accounting immediately said, "I had wine and appetizer, so I'll cover extra beyond my entree." Tom from development responded, "No worries, I've got the tip, you all got dessert and I skipped it." The transaction happened smoothly, people taking ownership of their actual consumption rather than defaulting to artificial equality. There was no awkwardness, no silence, no need to perform indifference to money. Everyone was just being honest about a straightforward logistical matter. The contrast with the earlier dinner was striking. These work relationships, much less intimate than his college friendships had once been, allowed for more honesty about mundane things. Why? Because there was less performance involved. Because these people saw each other in contexts that didn't allow for as much pretense. Because work relationships came with defined roles and expectations that paradoxically created space for more authentic interaction within bounded parameters. Ethan paid his share and felt nothing, no resentment, no internal conflict, no sense that anything important had been revealed. It was just a dinner bill, handled efficiently by people who could be straightforward with each other because they'd never promised to be more than colleagues who got along adequately. 6 months after the dinner at Meridian Bistro, Ethan received a wedding invitation. Not from any of his college friends, from a cousin who was marrying someone Ethan had never met. The invitation came with the usual expectation of gift and attendance, the social obligations that accrue around major life events regardless of relationship depth. Ethan found himself staring at the invitation, thinking about all the relationships in his life that existed primarily through obligation. People he maintained contact with not because he genuinely wanted to but because social convention suggested he should. College friends he no longer had anything in common with but who still appeared on his birthday text list. Extended family he saw annually at holidays despite having no desire to know them better. Professional contacts he networked with not from interest but from career strategy. The dinner 6 months ago had been an attempt to fulfill one of these obligations, to maintain a friendship that existed more in past tense than present, to honor shared history even when shared present no longer existed. And it had failed not dramatically but quietly, revealed through a moment of silence around a restaurant bill that none of them had wanted to address honestly. Some relationships don't end with arguments, Ethan realized. They don't conclude through dramatic confrontations or explicit decisions to stop being friends. They just peter out. Fade through accumulated small moments where honesty feels harder than performance, where avoiding discomfort becomes more important than maintaining genuine connection, where nobody wants to be the person who says, "This isn't working," so everyone just slowly stops trying. The dinner hadn't ended his friendships with Maya, Leo, and Jonah. The friendships had ended years earlier, probably, and the dinner had just made that ending visible. They'd all known it on some level, known the relationships had become hollow, known the evening was obligation rather than desire, known they were performing for each other rather than actually connecting. But nobody had wanted to acknowledge it explicitly, so they maintained the fiction right up until the bill arrived and forced a moment of truth they all chose to avoid. Ethan looked at his cousin's wedding invitation and made a decision. He wasn't going. Would send a gift and regrets, would maintain the minimum social obligation without the pretense of enthusiasm. And he was okay with that, with having fewer relationships that meant something rather than many relationships that meant nothing. He thought about texting the group from the dinner, about naming explicitly what they'd all understood implicitly, that their friendships had run their course, that it was okay to acknowledge that rather than continuing to pretend otherwise. But even that felt like too much, like creating unnecessary drama around something that had already naturally concluded. Sometimes the most honest thing was just acceptance, of endings, of change, of the reality that people grow apart and that's normal and doesn't require post-mortem analysis or formal dissolution. His phone sat on his desk, group chat with Maya, Leo, and Jonah still existing but inactive, last message still his own, "Thanks everyone for making time," from 6 months ago. He could delete the chat, could remove that digital artifact of a concluded friendship. But he left it, a small memorial to something that had been real once even if it no longer was. The silence around that dinner bill had been more honest than anything they'd said all evening. It had revealed that they were strangers performing friendship, that none of them wanted to create discomfort by expressing actual needs or preferences, that their relationships had become so fragile that even minor honesty felt risky. Ethan closed the wedding invitation, filed it in the stack of mail requiring response. He'd send a gift, would maintain the forms of family connection without the pretense of enthusiasm. That felt right, honoring obligations while being honest about their limitations, maintaining relationships at the level they actually existed rather than the level social convention suggested they should. Some relationships end with arguments, with dramatic confrontations, with explicit decisions and clear conclusions. But most just fade, revealed in small moments, in silences around restaurant bills, in texts that go unanswered, in invitations that elicit obligation rather than enthusiasm. The dinner at Meridian Bistro hadn't ended Ethan's college friendships. It had just made visible what had already happened, had exposed the performance and confirmed that none of them were interested in the vulnerability required to rebuild genuine connection. That was okay. Endings were okay. Ethan was learning to let them be what they were, quiet, undramatic, just the natural conclusion of relationships that had run their course. The bill had been split evenly. Nobody had been honest. And that dishonest moment had revealed more truth than any of their careful conversation had managed all evening. Pay attention to small moments, they often reveal the truth we avoid. This is what Ethan learned through a single uncomfortable silence around a restaurant bill, that minor social situations often concentrate larger relational dynamics into revealing moments, that how people handle mundane logistics expresses something about the quality of their connection, that avoiding small discomforts often means avoiding necessary truths. The dinner bill wasn't important in itself. $10 more or less, splitting evenly versus paying individually, these stakes were trivial. But the way Ethan and his friends handled that trivial situation revealed that their relationships had become fundamentally performative, that none of them trusted each other enough to express simple preferences, that maintaining comfortable surfaces had become more important than honest engagement. This happens constantly in relationships that are fading. Small moments arrive that could create space for honesty, for addressing disconnection, for naming what everyone feels but nobody wants to say. And we avoid them, choose comfortable pretense over uncomfortable truth, maintain fictions because explicitly ending them feels too difficult or too final or too hurtful. But the cost of these avoidances accumulates. Each small dishonesty, each moment where we say, "I'm fine," when we're not, Each time we prioritize social comfort over authentic expression, these decisions don't preserve relationships. They hollow them out, transform genuine connection into performance, create increasing distance while maintaining the appearance of closeness. The call to action isn't to be brutally honest in every minor social situation, to turn restaurant bill logistics into major confrontations about relationship dynamics. That would be exhausting and inappropriate. But it is to notice what small moments reveal, to pay attention when silence becomes uncomfortable, when questions receive evasive answers, when interactions leave you feeling drained rather than energized. If expressing a simple preference about payment splitting feels risky, that reveals something about relationship safety. If a dinner with supposed friends requires constant performance rather than allowing relaxation, that reveals something about intimacy level. If nobody follows up after shared time together, that reveals something about mutual investment. These revelations aren't necessarily bad. Relationships evolve, people grow apart, connections that served one life stage become less relevant in another. That's normal and doesn't reflect failure. What creates problems is insisting on maintaining relationships that no longer serve anyone, continuing to invest in connections that have become obligations rather than sources of genuine satisfaction. Ethan's college friendships had run their course. Acknowledging that, letting them end without drama or formal conclusion, was actually the healthiest response. Trying to force continued connection would have required both parties investing energy they didn't want to invest, maintaining performance neither wanted to maintain, honoring a past that no longer justified present commitment. So pay attention. Notice when small moments reveal larger truths. Notice when you're performing rather than being genuine. Notice when relationships require constant management rather than feeling easy. Notice when silences become uncomfortable rather than comfortable. These moments are providing information, not necessarily that something is wrong with you or the other person, but that the relationship has changed or was never what you thought it was. And when you notice these truths, honor them. You don't have to create dramatic confrontations or explicit endings. But you can stop pretending. Can let relationships exist at their actual level rather than the level you think they should be at. Can invest your limited time and energy in connections that feel mutual and enlivening rather than obligatory and draining. The dinner bill was trivial. The silence around it was not. It revealed that Ethan and his college friends had been maintaining a comfortable fiction about their continued closeness, that none of them wanted to invest in genuine reconnection, that their shared history didn't justify present relationship. Learning to read these small revelatory moments, learning to honor what they're showing you, is how you build a life with relationships that actually serve you rather than just fulfilling social obligations you've accumulated without questioning their continued relevance. Be story-wise.